we have a very distinguished panel with us. And before I request Ambassador Sharma to start the session, I'll request all of you to please put your phone on silent mode. I'll now request Ambassador Sharma to chair the session. Thank you.
Is this on? Just speak into this. Hello, is this on? Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon. Honorable Mr. Gauhar Rizvi, Mr. Shyam Charan, the distinguished audience. We have a week to go for the SAARC summit, and the subject that we have before us is what can make SAARC work. And we are privileged to have with us two very eminent persons. Mr. Gauhar Rizvi is the principal advisor to the Prime Minister of Bangladesh on Foreign Affairs. But that is what he's doing now. He brings with him a long career. He's been around in this region. He's one of the most eminent persons in South Asia. And as you know, SAARC was created in Bangladesh. So Mr. Rizvi has been involved with the SAARC from the creation, from the time that it was produced in the early 80s. And so we will have the privilege of listening to him. Ambassador Shyam Charan has also been associated with SAARC as the Foreign Secretary, and before that Ambassador in Nepal. And he has been since then writing a lot on these issues. So he will also speak about his perceptions of SAARC. Before I open the floor for both of them, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction. The SAARC summit, which is taking place next week, is an official forum. It's the culmination of the official meetings of SAARC. And SAARC heads of state and governments will meet on the 26th. Preceded by meetings of foreign ministers, preceded by meetings of foreign secretaries, and then before that, meetings of the heads of divisions who deal with SAARC in all these 8 countries. So it's a kind of a pipeline which continues to work. It's a default process. And when the heads of state and government meet, they go over the past 3 years. The summit has not taken place since Maldives in November 2011. They are supposed to take place every year. So this 3 years is a long gap. So the leaders will have a lot of work to do to make up for the lost time. The main agenda before the SAARC summit is threefold. One is the economic and dimension, which is basically to harness the synergies of history and geography among all the 8 countries for the benefit of all their people. Second is how to meet the challenges which are impending of climate change, pandemics, of vulnerability to financial crisis, and issues like maritime security, which are going to hound us, and natural disasters, which will not discriminate between political borders, and all of us are together in it. And the third point is about the exploding demographics of this region, which is considered to be the most youthful region in the world. The youth population in this region is the largest. So how to meet their aspirations, what to do with them, and what can be the commonalities. Now these are the 3 main areas, but the summit will have a huge agenda, and since SAARC is full of very eminent people, they are brilliant, so over the last 28 years, they have come out with a whole host of good ideas. The action at the moment is how to implement them, and also think what we can do to go beyond the present level. But I am happy that the subject is what can make SAARC work, so that we don't question the reason and purpose of SAARC. That is all so far well understood. So to me, these appear to be the main issues before us, but our distinguished panel will shed more light on it. So I'd like to begin by requesting Dr. Gauhar Rizvi to open.
Thank you. Thank you, Shil. Thank you very, very much. First, for giving me this opportunity of being here, and for your generous words, which obviously makes life a little difficult, because everything that I have learned about SAARC and South Asia, all my great teachers, much younger than me, most of them, but are all here. I've learned from Sham what little I know. Muni Bhai is there. He has been my long-time friend and teacher. Dipankar has been my colleague who has took us to Regional Center for Strategic Studies to instruct us on these matters. Then there is my very young friend Shiv Kumar, who teaches me more than I know. Bogi Rao. So given all these people, learned people, I'm a bit daunted. But what I will say is this, that I think the achievements of SAARC is often underestimated. It is fashionable to say the SAARC is going nowhere, and there is a certain amount of frustration, which is understandable. Things have not gone as fast as many of us would have hoped for. But I don't think the problem lies with the organization. The organization has been doing, the SAARC Secretariat has been doing quite a remarkable job. And if you see recently, the reason I can say this is Kavam Bhai recently gave me a list of all the SAARC summit resolutions. And for coming to this, I read through those summits. And what is remarkable about the summit resolutions is that the SAARC Secretariat has compelled the heads of governments to concentrate on the most important issues of the region. So there is hardly a region, whether a subject, whether it is environment, security, water, environment, global warming, terrorism, money laundering, you name it. SAARC has forced the leaders to think about it, focus their mind on it, and has got helpful resolutions passed. And resolutions, it is true, often don't get implemented, and we'll come to that in a moment. But what is important about the resolutions is these legitimates the Secretariat and all of us working on this, gives us certain legitimacy that it has the endorsement of the governments. So we shouldn't just dismiss the resolutions just because often they are slow in. And the other reason why SAARC has got itself a bad name is sometimes one almost feels that SAARC was designed by its makers not to be successful. Now, literally, you get this feeling that it was designed that way. It was designed in the sense that it has been always underfunded. Secretary General to heads of government has varied from Secretary General to Secretary General. Some have had private access to heads of governments, others have not had. And they have never given the staff capacity, institutional capacity to do this huge mandate that was given to them. So I think as we look to beyond this summit, and as we look to the role that SAARC can play, the SAARC Secretary General can play, we must also think about how we can enhance their institutional capacity, how we can give them a greater budget. And in a world where status is important to get access to decision makers, I really think the time has come when SAARC Secretary General should be elevated to a ministerial rank so that the responsibilities are enormous. And that job could probably be made easier. Not, it will be the same person, but it will be made easier if I had higher access. Now, why I am excited to be here today is that despite all our frustrations, the situation in South Asia has dramatically changed. And there has never been a better time to get and when I talk of SAARC, I'm not only talking just about the SAARC organization or the mandate of SAARC, I'm really talking about South Asian regional integration, developing it into a South Asian community, way beyond that. And to me, this is a very opportune moment. A lot of compelling forces have come together, which essentially means that if we can grab this opportunity, I really think we can go quite. Let me say why I think the situation has improved or prospects are so good. Firstly, all of us have traveled around South Asia. Some of us do this most regularly. And there is a noticeable change of opinion, public opinion. Public wants greater cooperation. They want greater mobility. They do not understand why all these obstacles are created for good relations between the neighbors. And whether grudgingly or opportunistically, the governments are also recognizing that SAARC has much to offer, and therefore this is something. And one begins to notice there is more governmental will now than ever before. So public opinion is ready. The government has developed some political will. And there are other helpful reasons. One, as you know, when SAARC was first initiated, and thank you for reminding us it was done in Bangladesh, but I think there were mixed motives behind SAARC. The reason the SAARC, some of the smaller neighbors of India had come together, was they felt this would give them some maneuvering room with India. Naturally enough, India understood that this might be one of the things, and it kept SAARC at an arm's length. What I have noticed in the last 3 years, possibly 4 years, there has been a tremendous shift in Indian position. Partly this shift has come from growing Indian confidence, growing Indian affluence. India is now sure of its place in the world. It is recognized as a major power, well on to becoming one of the, it is already one of the 3 largest economies, but well on to becoming even other greater and better things in life. Also, India has recognized that it makes good sense to have your neighbors with you if your aspirations are higher than just the region. Having troublesome neighbors on your borders is a drag. If they can't do anything, they have nuisance value. And therefore, India has become much more receptive, much more supportive. Last week, Mr. Shyam Saran, under a different hat, was hosting the South Asia Economic Summit. And I was absolutely delighted to see that the Public Diplomacy Division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, External Affairs, was supporting it. Now, that just shows what a sea change that has taken place in government attitude in India. So now that we have public opinion, we have government will, and we have India on the right side, moment is very, very good. These are all positive reasons. There are also some very, very good, helpful, negative reasons, and which also we need to capitalize. All the major issues of the 21st century that South Asia faces, whether we are talking about environmental degradation, climate change, global warming, terrorism, drug trafficking, weapons, rivers, water, you name it. These are all transnational issues. And only way we will be able to deal with these is through cooperation, not confrontation. And even if a single state decided it would do it on its own, it is impossible because the problems extend beyond your frontiers. So that is becoming a very, very compelling need, and governments are beginning to recognize. For the first time in 2010, when Dr. Manmohan Singh was in Dhaka, he talked about basin-wide river management, or river water management. Now, that's a huge step forward, huge progress. He completely removed the tariff barrier for Bangladesh's access to Indian market. Similar access have been given to other countries. So you can see that things are moving at a tremendously fast pace compared to what had happened in the previous quarter of a century. So not only problems cannot be solved nationally, the cost of not solving this problem is enormous. We have now realized we have more than 6 decades of post-colonial experience. Our ability, our past policy, if you do more of it, you will get the same result, which is beggaring your neighbor, hurting your neighbor, with no benefit to yourself, harboring terrorists in your land so you can upset somebody else. This sort of thing has been happening. And today, I don't think our self-interest, national self-interest, compels us to work regionally. So there is absolutely no way we could. One of the things which Shyam will no doubt talk about it, and I think he has changed all of our perception by giving us a most compelling argument. He said, South Asia's greatest advantage is proximity. And no doubt he will say, if you look at the cost of trade, it is enormous, it is staggering. To ship things, to transport things from Nepal to Burma, Nepal to Bangladesh, which is less than actual distance between the two borders is only 22 kilometers. But even if I take Kathmandu and Dhaka, it's a couple of hundred miles, can take up to 45 days. And much of it happens before you even reach the border. Then the delays happen at the border and beyond the border, but even before you can reach the border. Again, I'm taking some of the stuff which I've been reading from you, Shyam, is the cost of sending goods from Karachi or Islamabad to Dhaka is much more than sending things to US or China. So these are extremely compelling reasons why we cannot afford to go on doing the same thing as we did before. Absolutely compelling. And to add to this, South Asia has now developed a very substantial internal market. I'm talking from Bangladesh. We have long been accustomed to running around Europe and America to find market. And today, we have absolutely unrestricted access to the Indian market. What is holding us back is the cost of transportation. So, and this thing is also creating a sort of excitement and frustration in the private sector, in the business sector, who are also bringing pressures on that. So what I'm really basically saying is all round, for positive reasons, negative reasons, a compulsion towards a greater integrated South Asia. And in this context, SAARC and Secretariat can really play an important. It will not do everything, but it can play. As I have already said, the SAARC Secretariat has managed to put important issues on the table, has brought some fresh thinking. The resolutions that are passed are well informed, well argued. But what it needs, as I said earlier on, greater resource and focus on implementation. Implementation is what is holding SAARC back. Partly, it is again the fault of the way SAARC has been designed to function, consensus of all the members. But it also leaves us, the SAARC also gives you the room to do it within 2-3 countries. So, and I think where real hope lies is wherever there is consensus between 2-3 countries, they want to do something. SAARC should facilitate it rather than they're waiting for all the 8 to get together. So if you start working more on sub-regional side, that would probably help. Also, there is still, although most seminars I go to, people say to me, God, everything that could be written about SAARC has been written. And nothing happens. But actually, when you actually ask for some studies, it is lacking, it is missing. Information is still not very well collected. Another area where SAARC could really help to provide is to get more feasibility studies done, so more market analysis done, which will help the private sector to recognize the extraordinary opportunities that there are. The last thing I should say before I hand over is that some interesting things have begun to happen. A year ago, Bangladesh linked its power grid with India. 500 megawatts is flowing from India to Bangladesh. That was government to government. Now we are talking with private power suppliers from India and going to buy another 500 megawatts. So the power market is developing. And if you look at the South Asia, although probably there is enough current generation, I don't know. But often they are in the wrong place. And there is a mismatch between where the supply is and where the demand is. By creating this South Asia power grid, we are really freeing one of the main impediments for growth. All the countries are suffering from power. And yet, if you look at South Asia, especially hydroelectric power, there's an enormous amount of power to be harnessed, but no single country can do it on its own. No single country can do it. You cannot produce it or you cannot consume it on your own. You cannot transmit it on your own. So, what I was saying earlier, that compulsion is driving us. And if we miss this boat, sadly, the picture that comes of South Asia, I'm almost too embarrassed to repeat what South Asia looks to the rest of the world. We have all the record of poverty, malnutrition, all the negative records that there is. All our neighbors have left us and gone far ahead. And I don't know. So the choice between us to continue to live in our misery, to continue to carry our shame, or come together and reshape South Asia, I have no doubts that we are being now compelled. It is no longer an option. It is no longer an option. And the choice is very stark. We have to work as a region, or we will be forever consigned to misery. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency, and thank you for bringing out so well the compelling logic of SAARC. And naturally, India and Bangladesh have been in the spearhead. And what you mentioned is true. Between 2011 and now, the trade between India and Bangladesh has doubled from 2 billion to 6 billion. So things can happen if we take steps. And you mentioned power grid, which is another very positive dimension. We have now Ambassador Shamshan.
Thank you very much, Sheelan. Thank you, Gaur Bhai, for, as Sheel said, for making out such a compelling case for South Asia cooperation. So what can make SAARC work? I think the answer to the question is what can make South Asia work? Because it is only if South Asia works will SAARC actually take off. And we all know what are the issues among the South Asian countries. And if there is a positivity, which I see, that positivity is precisely the sum of the changes that Gaur Bhai mentioned. And one of the positive changes, of course, being what has happened in India itself. A new government has taken office. And at least in terms of intent, if not so much in action so far, in terms of intent, it has obviously put South Asia, its neighborhood, at the top of its foreign policy agenda. Important visits have taken place to South Asian countries. There has been a strong desire expressed for much better political relations amongst the South Asian countries, and also a willingness to let India emerge as a kind of an economic engine for the growth of all the countries in the region. I will take a slightly different tack because I think that to make SAARC work, and as I said, to make South Asia work, there is no doubt in my mind that the lead has to be taken by India. Why is that so? Because India, its economy, its population, its area, it is by far larger than all our neighbors combined together. So this is a huge asymmetry if you look at the South Asian situation. The second point that needs to be looked at is that all the South Asian countries have borders with India, but most of them don't have borders with each other. So in that sense, India sits right in the middle of South Asia. And therefore, if we are talking about South Asia cooperation, unless this huge giant which is sitting right in the middle, if it does not take the right kind of decisions, provides the kind of connectivity which is required amongst the countries of the region, I'm afraid South Asia cooperation will not work. Even if the others want to cooperate amongst themselves, that is physically impossible unless India steps in and takes the lead. The third important aspect is, and which Gaur mentioned, when we have been talking about what is that special quality that South Asian countries possess in trying to promote trade and economic cooperation amongst themselves, which is not there for others. That is, those who are dealing with South Asia from outside, what do they not have which South Asian countries have? And that is the principle of proximity, which Gaur Bhai mentioned. That is what you can leverage. if you want to distinguish yourself from others, other partners with whom South Asian countries have economic or trade relations, the one important advantage that you have, which others do not have, is that proximity. And therefore, the challenge, to my mind, the biggest challenge is, can the South Asian countries come together in order to realize, in order to leverage this most important advantage which they have, which others do not have. And sadly, it is in that respect, as was mentioned, that we find it much cheaper to trade with a faraway country like the US or ship things through Singapore rather than just across the border amongst ourselves. So while good things are happening in South Asia, I think if we do not address these kind of issues and do them urgently, we will not develop that kind of leverage that we need to, because today, if we are living in a globalized economy, globalized world, then competitiveness is the key. If you want to really improve your economy, if you want to develop, you have to have competitiveness. And that competitiveness requires that this is not just tariff related, but all other aspects which come under the rubric of trade facilitation, those are in place. And the reality is that in terms of trade facilitation, South Asia is really very, very far behind, even some of the adjacent regions like in Southeast Asia. So RIS, which is the Research and Information System for Developing Countries, a think tank which I chair, we undertook a study of the border crossings and the connectivity, say, between Myanmar and Laos, Laos and Thailand, Myanmar and, say, China. And by the way, all these are not the so-called CMLV countries are supposed to be relatively, underdeveloped. And we were quite amazed to find that if we compare the border crossings and the kind of facilities which are in place at the border points between, say, Myanmar and these countries I mentioned, it is far, far superior, far more advanced than we had, say, between India and Bangladesh or India and Nepal. There are fixed scanners at the border. The customs and immigration is very, very smooth. Now, as Gohar Bhai pointed out, that even though the distance is very small and maybe the road is quite good these days, but if you are going to be having, 2-3 kilometer long truck lines at the border, and if immigration and customs is going to take hours and hours, then how do we leverage that aspect of proximity? So this is really in terms of how do we really make things work. I think unless we address this issue, we will not get very far. So has something been done in this regard? Basically, it's not that the problem has not been recognized. It's not that work is not going on to, for example, set up integrated checkpoints at various points on the border. I think some are under construction at the Bangladesh border itself. We are now also talking about how it is not necessary to create parallel facilities on both sides of the border. If India is investing huge sums of money, setting up a checkpost on its side of the border, why not co-locate facilities of both countries in the same buildings? This will avoid large amount of investment, and this is done, by the way, quite normally in Europe, for example. So if we do that, then the investment required will be less, and perhaps the crossing will be much easier than it is today. I understand that finally, after a lot of effort, the motor vehicles agreement amongst the SAARC countries, which would facilitate the movement of cargo traffic across the borders, is likely to be signed in Kathmandu. Let us hope that does happen, because that's very important. The other aspect which we are looking at, of course, is the financing aspect. We have the SAARC Development Fund, which is located currently in Thimphu, which is supposed to finance not SAARC-wide projects only, but even sub-regional projects of the kind which Gohar mentioned. Now, there is some talk about would it be possible to set up a SAARC development bank, like we have the BRICS Bank, or we have other, like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. That is a good idea. Maybe something like that can be looked at. We have talked about climate change, which is somebody like me, who has been involved with climate change. I worry a great deal about what is happening in South Asia, because we talk about South Asia being a single geopolitical unit. We talk about it being a single geo-economic unit. But most people do not realize that much more than that, we are a single ecological space. Even though we have political boundaries, but if you look at the region ecologically, there is hardly any other region of the world which is actually as interconnected ecologically as South Asia is. So whether it is the river basins which Gohar Bhai mentioned, or it is the Himalayan range which we have, or the sea space around the Indian subcontinent, or even the monsoons, which all of us got impacted by. If you look at the ecological challenge which South Asia is facing, perhaps if you really comprehended that, all the other different challenges which seem to be so forbidding at this point of time will actually pale into insignificance, because the nature of the threat is such that any other threat seems quite irrelevant in a sense. And mind you, this is not something that is going to be happening in the future. It is already happening. So several countries like Bhutan, Nepal, and even in India, we now have this major problem with the global glacial lakes which are forming in the higher altitudes of the Himalayas, and are basically held back by just loose moraine walls. And if there is a major breach, then you can have inundation right down the Himalayan range and the lower reaches of the mountains. Also, the melting of glaciers is now almost an established fact. And the perennial rivers that we have may no longer be perennial over a period of time. They may well become even seasonal flows. The monsoon patterns are changing all across the region. And we know very little about why they are changing, what is the likely consequences of that, or the sea level rise, which at least two of our SAARC members, Sri Lanka and the Maldives, are facing almost an existential threat as a result of the rising of the oceans. And linked to that, I feel, is here is a region whose countries are perhaps the most vulnerable, and yet they have not been able to come together and speak with one voice at the multilateral forum, where actually our fate in a sense is being decided by those who have been mostly responsible for climate change, but whose impact is mostly being suffered by the countries of South Asia. So there is a great deal that needs to be done. I still believe that the kind of perception, political perception, public opinion perception, which needs to underlie a really dynamic move towards cooperation amongst the countries is still lacking. There is still not a sense of urgency. There is still not the kind of compulsion that you're talking about. We may intellectually understand it, but it is not something which is really driving the South Asian countries to really sit down and try to work out how they can collaborate together. So the logic of cooperation, I think, is undisputed. But we have not yet found, I believe, we have not yet found the ways in which we can translate this compulsion into one, institutions that work, and secondly, the kind of procedures or the kind of nuts and bolts things that we have to do in order to make it work, those are moving very, very slowly. So it is my hope that this new energy that I talked about in the region, I fully accept the argument that today the political environment in South Asia is perhaps better than it has been for a long time. And this is perhaps the moment when it can be actually leveraged to do something substantial, do something significant. Even if we are able to get to a point where the SAARC leaders themselves are concerned that declarations that have been adopted at their level are not being implemented, and ask questions why it is not being implemented, even that is a step forward. Because what happens usually is that they come, they make a very high-sounding declaration, they go home. Next year they come, they make another high-sounding declaration and go home again. Very rarely do you have a situation where leaders get together and say, why are we getting another declaration? What happened to the declaration that we adopted last time? That kind of, accounting for what has been decided at the summit level, that kind of accounting is not there. So in some case, some sense, shaming them is also something that you perhaps might like to try out in order to get some drive into this, because if there is no political cost to making declarations and going home, I think we will get more of the same as we go along.
Thank you, Shyam. You brought out this very distinct irony that this is the most interconnected region ecosystem-wise, but in terms of man-made connections, it is the least connected region by roads or by telephone or by all other means. And the other thing is, even the glaciers are melting. When will this freeze melt from relations among South Asians? That is another point. But I'd like to...
If the Secretary General of SAARC should actually be telling us how should make it work.
Yes. Actually, this how-to is the dimension that we should have in front of us at the coming summit. And some of the points have been already mentioned by Ambassador Shamcharan. The main point is that this tendency to have one-off event and then going home should be surpassed by a continuous process, a process which is relentless, as was done in the case of European Union. The coal and steel community was set up in 1952-53. And between then and 1992, about 40 years, they worked relentlessly. Thousands of man-hours were spent to really create the systems. Now that exercise in our case is much smaller because we already inherited a system which was interconnected till 65. So we just have to restore it. But for that restoration, the kind of work that is required is demanding, and the leadership have to put, as Shyam mentioned, accountability on the people who are doing it. So that is one important dimension. But I would like to ask you, Gauhar Saab, can one or two or three of the South Asian countries take the responsibility to spearhead this process and move it forward so that others will join in, and it will not appear as though it is being done only by one country? Because if one or two or three countries join, then it shows that there is common interest of more than one country.
Actually, some useful beginnings have already happened. There are two task forces, one India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and another India, Bangladesh, Nepal, who are actually talking with a view to identifying some doable projects. And the reason this is now possible is all these countries are on board that this can be done jointly. These decisions were made in the Prime Ministerial Summit. So things are moving. The other, there are some, as I said, there are some important changes have happened. One important change, now talking only about Bangladesh, India, our sub-region, Bhutan and Nepal. The debate over transit connectivity is over. You know, for years, will Bangladesh allow transit? And political parties take posturing over my dead body. Okay? That debate is done, is over. There is no longer anybody saying, should there be? But what is lacking, as you just said, in 1965, earlier connectivities were disrupted, rail lines were physically lifted. So you have a gap of a few miles between two railways. Those, we have begun the process of putting them back, but they are taking an enormous amount of time because in the meantime, this land has been taken over under cultivation. In some senses, in places, government has sold these land or they have been occupied. So they have to be all got rid of. By far, the biggest mode of communication transport was river from West Bengal through East Bengal into Assam. We have not done any dredging for years. The result is many of these rivers have silted up. So and this is where we have something concrete we can do. Can we bring consortiums, groups, public sector, private sector, partnerships to get into these things because these will pay for themselves. Bangladesh, now that it is ready to allow transit to happen to the northeast, the infrastructure is lacking. So on small scale it is happening. But to really make it into something regular, we will need to find ways of getting the investment to be done, and these will all pay back. These are commercially, financially viable projects. When we built the Jamuna Bridge, most people say, how will you pay for it? Well, firstly, it was technologically impossible. Well, then that was sorted out. How will you pay for it? We paid for it much ahead of the schedule. Whatever projection we had made of the traffic that would go over Jamuna Bridge was gross underestimate. Traffic is much greater. Now, we are looking for another bridge on the side. When Padma Bridge, for years the World Bank would say, no, this is not a viable project. You will never be able to pay for your Jamuna. Why should we fund? Now, the government of Bangladesh is building it with its own resources. Existing projection says one bridge is not enough. So what I'm saying, there's a tremendous commercial possibilities. And this is one area we will need to. How do we bring in? How do we create consortium? And then, I don't know if anybody here is from Asian Development Bank and these multilateral financing. They are all talking about regional, sub-regional, encouraging regional, sub-regional. So I think time has come for us to sit down and start doing these things. With Bangladesh, we are building now a container port in Ashuganj. Once that is done, from Ashuganj, short stretch of road from Ashuganj to Akhawra, a rail is being built from Akhawra to Agartala. That will be done. So you can see, but the frustrating thing is we are not doing it in a big way, even though financially and commercially it is feasible.
Yes, this is Shyam. How would you like to place this? There are two ways. One is that we move about it incrementally. The other is to put a big goal before us of South Asian Economic Union and say that these are all integral components of that whole process, and then commit resources, both human and funds, to propel this whole process. And in that process, the gains come to people. So they taste the fruits, as you mentioned, the Jamuna Bridge, for instance. So, Shyam, I'd like to pick your head on this.
The incremental change is already happening. So I don't think it is any longer a question of should we go in for incremental change or should we go in for the big bang. Because incremental change in virtually every area is actually taking place. And the sense that there could be benefit is also coming because if you take just the power supply, it has made a big difference.
World of difference.
And I can tell you that the possibility that the same could happen between India and Pakistan was very much influenced by the success of this venture. That ordinary people have actually benefited from that. It's another matter that for various political reasons, despite having gone pretty far ahead with Pakistan, we were not able to finally put it in place. But there was certainly a very strong sense on the Pakistani side that getting this power would help Pakistan meet this huge challenge of 8 to 12 hours of power cuts every day. Immediate benefit for the population. And each time that you have that benefit, it removes the barrier somewhat to further cooperation. But as far as the Big Bang is concerned, the financing, to my mind, is not really the issue. The issue is really whether or not you can have the countries sit down together and work out exactly what is the kind of priority they want to attach to infrastructure development. And I always keep saying it's not only the hardware of development, but it's the software of this infrastructure development which is important. You can put a nice highway, but if you're going to make your trucks stay there for 10 hours a day, then it's of no use. So it's not only the physical connectivity that you need to ensure, but you have to ensure that you have all these measures in place which enables you to bring about this very fast, rapid movement of both peoples as well as goods. So if you're talking about South Asia Economic Union, that goal has been actually articulated quite some time back, that there should be actually a free flow of goods, of peoples, of ideas across borders. But when it comes to actually allowing people to and goods to cross freely, that's not really the case. To give you an example, I mentioned that India is the largest transit country in a sense. Supposing tomorrow the Prime Minister of India were to make a statement in Kathmandu to say, I will give national treatment to all our neighbors as far as movement of goods, etc., through India is concerned. Let them choose any highway they want, let them choose any rail line they want, let them choose any port they want to use in order to export or import their goods. Now, that would make a huge impact. Will it overload India? No, because actually even if all the cargo which is being generated by our neighboring countries were to use the Indian transportation network, it would be a tiny fraction of what is actually moving around. So even with the kind of infrastructure we have at the moment, you can actually bring about a major change. Now, whether or not they will use this is a different matter, but the strategy which India has to have is to change. It is not by limiting your neighbors, but actually projecting yourself as the best provider of services to your neighbors so that they don't look anywhere else. Why should they look anywhere else when you are able to provide the most cost-effective, the best services that is available? That is how you would, if you are looking at it strategically, you are looking at it politically, how do you gain political influence? Today, if you say, no, I'm not going to allow so-and-so to come, I will not allow the Chinese to come, I will not allow the Americans to come, it's simply not going to work, number one. Because it's no longer possible to have that kind of a situation. But if you can ensure that you, as the largest country, provide the best services which are possible, your influence actually increases dramatically. But then that requires very major political decisions to be taken. As I said, I do not consider that financing is an issue. It is still an issue of what's there in terms of your mindset. You have adopted the rhetoric, but you have not yet gone from adopting the rhetoric to the point where it actually is something that you believe.
May I just add a little bit?
Yes.
I mean, you are absolutely right. And there are also a lot of, over the years, interest groups have developed. For instance, just to give you one example which we have recently had to deal. We have fairly primitive but functioning fairly well 4 land boundary ICPs. Hilly, Banglabon, Petropol, Benapol, and Tamabil, Dauki. So when we go to Tamabil, Dauki, etc., and have been to all these places, there's very little traffic. Yet, Tamabil, Dauki is the main entrance to Northeast India. The reason is that, and I don't know how they have done it, the traders on the 2 sides of the border in Benapol, Petropol have created a mechanism where they are denying the clearance of goods in any other, on the pretext that this is the Government of India rule. So we came and told our colleagues here, but why is this restriction? And literally, I'm telling you, they had to scour through their files, and there was no restriction. So we had to send the word to everybody, there are no restrictions whatsoever. Well, how do you deal with the perception where there is no reality? Because you can't send out another instruction saying this rule has been cancelled or withdrawn. So we basically have to go around telling them that you should be able to say. And it is really taking time to convince people that it can go through other routes. And also there is certain amount of, you talked, and for instance, there is no reason why all the checks should be done twice over. One country can do incoming, both countries can do incoming. You have these integrated IT systems where you can transfer the data to each other. No, they will do it separately. So in the space of 50 yards, if you go to Darshana Gede border, for about 50 yards or 100 yards, and people are carrying all their luggage on their head, because you cannot do it together. So these are persisting. You see it, how ridiculous it is, but they are persisting.
I think in this direction, Shyam, your own ideas about border management, which
Yes.
you have been, and maybe the governance issues which come to fore, whether they can be handled by particularly border states, where there should be a greater emphasis and accent on management of the borders, to facilitate movement of people, containers, transits. And if that happens, as the RIS has found out, that the man days lost can be reduced.
Absolutely.
And it can lead to rising GDP, because the contribution to the GDP growth also would be considerable.
Actually, we are focusing attention mostly on tariffs, where tariffs are actually a small now fraction of the total cost.
They are not there.
It's the transportation costs, handling costs, which actually are the major part of the price, actual final price.
And in each case, there are private individuals and private groups who are benefiting from it. So they have a vested interest in keeping this process as slow as possible.
And how to get the private sector involved, because I get a feeling, we tried to do the South Asia Forum, private sector was involved, but they always go behind governments, and they'd like governments to put in the money, and then they would put in much slower, whereas the gain eventually will be theirs. So that's another area where we need a little bit of momentum to be built up, so that private sector feel encouraged to come in. So there's and the public campaign bit, I felt that the media has not been helpful to SAARC. They should cover SAARC issues. The good news from SAARC should be covered. I'll just give one example. You know, they talk so much. This is the other lost cause I pursued, nuclear disarmament. You talk of nuclear deterrent, it has sex appeal. They'll come and talk about it. But can anyone guarantee that it'll succeed? Nobody can give guarantee about against failure of nuclear deterrent. But still they talk. On the other hand, when you talk about cooperation, oh, ye nahi kalega ji. But if cooperation fails, nobody will be harmed. The other thing which is so dear to you, which has so much appeal to you, if it fails, imagine the world. But this is the perverse mindset that the good things, they are not interested. They like to nitpick on that little thing. Whereas bigger dangers, they are ignoring, even as you mentioned, climate change. So there is a need for the media to really come and do a bit of good news as well.
I mean, there's a need for harmonization also. I mean, such ridiculous things are happening. For instance, our weekends are Friday, Saturday. Your weekends are Saturday, Sunday. The result is nothing happens from Friday evening to Monday morning. Now, what does it take to her? And you know, we have had meetings, we have had agreements, but somehow, somewhere then our office hours and your office hours don't tally. So in the morning, our offices are open, yours aren't. And then when we shut our office, you keep your offices open. So these small things are really causing havoc.
Actually, the other advantage of the difference of office hours is in the case of the staggering of power supply, because then we can have a power grid and the load can vary and it can be advantageous to...
He's turning your...
No, I would like to see that happen. I definitely welcome that idea. But what I'm really saying is these are not big issues. As Ramba is quite rightly saying, these are small things.
Speaking, if there is a very clear political direction that this has to be resolved, because politically it has been decided that it must happen, like it happened with the power supply to Bangladesh. Things will happen. But, you know, with regard to, say, cross-border movement, usually what we hear is that, you know, there is a security element involved. That, you know, if goods are coming, say, from Pakistan into India or from Bangladesh into India, then we have to be careful because, you know, there could be security issues, so you have to examine the cargo. But actually, if you look at it, for virtually all the security concerns you have, there are very good technological answers. Solutions. Which countries which are far more concerned about security issues than you are actually using them for quite a number of years. So as I mentioned to you, having say a fixed scanner at the border. At the Nepal border, if you put just a fixed scanner at some of the crossing points, the long lines that you have of trucks will immediately, you know, disappear. Because then you can just, you know, on a very random basis, and a random is also, there are software programs which determine what kind of randomness you need. And you can take care of that. You can have GPS, you know, installed in your, you know, cargo trucks. You can have electronic locking systems. So there are a number of answers to the security issue. So security sometimes becomes a veto over what you can and what you cannot do. But again, if there is a clear direction that this needs to be resolved, it will be resolved. As it has been in this case. If it was not a clear direction, there would have been hundreds of experts saying why it cannot be done. This is you know, something that we have to acknowledge, that there has to be a very strong, clear political direction that this needs to happen. And that is where I think, especially in the case of India, if the new government is not only in terms of intent, but it really wants some of these things to happen. And the word goes to the level where implementation is to take place. I see really no reason why it cannot, because there are no real sort of impediments that stand in the way. No impediments which have not already been resolved somewhere else.
quite satisfactorily.
So the problem is in the mind of the bureaucrats.
I'm not because I've been a bureaucrat, but I think the bureaucrats are very, very attuned to what the political leadership wants and does not want. If the political leadership says, we have taken this decision at this summit, and God help you if by the next summit these are not implemented, you can be certain that they will be implemented. Ways will be found to implement them. But if they know a year later or 2 years later, another summit will be held, what we really need to do is give another high-sounding, draft declaration, which everybody can get up and say, we are committed to another big project for South Asia cooperation, and then go home. Why should anybody bother?
I think we need an impatient man to look after these things. That's where you need a Secretary General, because governments get preoccupied.
I think you're right.
Governments get preoccupied, you see. But can we open it to questions but very short questions, and we have limited time. So first is, please.
I'm Anup Bose. I'm a senior advocate, Supreme Court of India, and an advisor to the House of Tata. 2 short questions. The aspect of disaster was touched upon. Now, we're all free countries, but there are 3 issues on which the SAARC countries need to address themselves, since they're all free and independent countries. First, the issue of peace, which is uneasy in this region. Second is the issue of poverty, which is very important. And thirdly is the issue of disaster, which doesn't spare anyone, can strike at any moment. And the second question relates to something which troubles all of us here and hangs heavily over our heads, and that is the scourge of terrorism. And here I'm prompted to go to Winston Churchill in different countries that we have. No truck or parley with you or the grisly gang that work out your wicked will. You do your worst, we'll do our best. So how do the SAARC countries get together and do their best to rid this entire region of the scourge of terrorism, which has the potential of destabilizing the entire region itself? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll have 2-3 questions, and then Professor Muni, please.
I take clue from what Mr. Shyam Saran has been saying, though Gaurav said that the political matters are improving, but they are not improving adequately enough. Therefore, if you want to fix SAARC, fix the politics of the region. And what I mean is not simply India-Pakistan relations, because even between India and, leave apart Pakistan at the moment, other countries, there is a huge trust deficit which India needs to cover. And the neighboring countries have all not made up their mind to what extent to relate themselves to India. All the polities in the neighborhood are deeply fragmented on India question. And unless you internal problems, no leadership which wants to survive internally can take decisions which are bold enough to ignore some of the powerful constituencies. And the third factor is the extra-regional. Like it or not, China is becoming an invisible elephant in SAARC these days.
Please.
My name is Tanmoy Chakrabarti. I'm responsible for the government business for TCS Worldwide, based in Delhi. I was very intrigued with the comment that the bureaucracy needs a push from the politicians. In India, they need the push from the Supreme Courts to take action, and in the international context, they need push from politicians to take actions. My point is, for 65, 66 years, we've had the bureaucracy and the leadership trying to stitch a unison in SAARC. And the people of the countries in the SAARC region are left to be bystanders and are witnessing the turn of events or the lack of it thereof. Is it not time that we have a citizen action group representing all the SAARC countries, parallelly working with the SAARC Secretariat or the leadership? Let there be people nominated from these countries by the people who will parallelly work with SAARC Secretariat and build the momentum of the mood of the people in the region, that there is need to break the shackles and move in this snail-like manner that we have been doing so far, and allow the emotions of the people to come in and say, look, we want to be another ASEAN. In fact, we have a potential to be 100 times that of ASEAN, which is totally underperformed so far. So my question to the group here, the leadership is, when will the citizens participate in stitching SAARC? If this topic of this afternoon is, how do you make SAARC work? Thank you.
I think we've had 3 questions. We'll have one round more. Please.
I can take the question of terrorism because, firstly, let me say one thing. Although we are all committed to SAARC, we are all committed to regional cooperation, but we have to recognize that the region is very vast and different countries are progressing or not progressing at separate speed. So we should not allow one country or 2 countries to hold the whole region back. So we will have to, we can't be, march in locked steps. We will march forward those who can. So that's why when you talk about terrorism and the region, terrorism may be an issue in some countries, but not in others. We had this problem, we have dealt with it. And the reason we dealt with it is because it was hurting us. No country benefits by harboring terrorists. No country. Sooner or later, it is going to devour you. And therefore, it is in one's own national interest to, and we are cooperating. We have recently seen in Burdwan how quickly the 2 countries have taken these things on. There's a constant exchange of intelligence, information is taking place. On the borders, we have a coordinated border management, exchange of information, coordinated border patrolling. So all sorts of things are happening because we recognize. Now, if some country does not recognize, obviously it's a problem. And that's why I would not say that this is a problem. This is not a problem. Terrorism is not a problem. I hope in India-Nepal border, India-Bhutan border, Bangladesh-India border, it might have been once. It is not longer. You can see how peaceful Northeast India is. All those who were once terrorists and secessionists and whatnot are now into democratic politics of India. This has all happened because we worked together, because we both realized it is in our interest. You know, again, obviously, as I said, Muni Bhai, I would dare not challenge, because it has been truly a teacher in more ways than I can tell you. Muni Bhai, I really think the question of trust deficit is exaggerated. It is exaggerated. There are some groups who will always find an excuse for not, so, you know, we can't trust them. Let me just tell you what happened with us. When we got $1 billion line of credit, the real difficulty was not that there was no trust or there was any feeling that this money has been sent to destabilize Bangladesh or anything. It was just that the officials had not worked together. The bureaucrats of the 2 countries, the officials of 2 countries had not worked together. And they were constantly having communication. There was procedures on one side, on the other. Now, we spent several months of complete inertia, inaction, on the question that our officers interpreted that India would approve whatever proposals we sent to them, even though the money has been given to us. Now, India had no intention of approving or necessity for approving. What basically happened was this: India guaranteed the Exim Bank of India that you can fund this, and government of India would guarantee it. Now, in order for the Exim Bank to be guaranteed, Indian government needed the proposals from us. Otherwise, what are they guaranteeing? Our officials took this as an example of us having to secure India's approval. And it took good 3 to 6 months to sort out this thing. So those things are there. But by and large, it isn't, again, at least I speak for the eastern and northeastern part. Those things are declining, and people really understand the virtue and benefit of cooperation. I think we should talk about citizens' action.
Well, I wish there was a very large and powerful citizens' movement for South Asia cooperation. The reality is that there isn't. Sheil just mentioned that there are many more other things which are sexy, but South Asia cooperation is unfortunately not. So if there was a large and powerful citizens' movement, that would be more than welcome. We have had citizen groups working on South Asia cooperation, some very, very dedicated people. We have had a South Asia Eminent Persons group which has worked on a vision for South Asia. We have had, various track 2 dialogue amongst South Asian countries. Gohar Bhai just referred to the South Asia Economic Summit which we had recently. This was the 7th such summit. And each time it provides a platform for a very large number of intellectuals, economists, political figures to come together to talk about how South Asia cooperation can be encouraged. So I don't think that there is a lack of such circles of people who who are committed to and who would like to promote South Asia regional cooperation. We even have on the business side, CII and FICCI, all of them have platforms for bringing business people together to talk about how they can improve South Asia economic cooperation. But at the end of the day, it still needs governments to take certain critical decisions in order to facilitate that cooperation. And if there are governments which believe, or political people who believe that moving in that direction may have some political cost to them, they will not. So whether it is due to vested interests or whether it is due to some other political compulsion, the fact is that there are people who believe that if we move in this direction, this will lose you public or political support. That has to change. It has not yet got to the point where the political value of such cooperation is seen as being more productive in terms of, say, getting votes rather than the opposite. So that balance has not yet changed. And yes, media can play an important role, but media will also take its cue from what it sees is the major preoccupation of the governments. If the governments show that this is a major preoccupation, media will start focusing on it. So I still believe that you cannot absolve governments from and leadership from doing what is necessary in order to push this process forward.
And I can add to that one thing from my own experience. You see, this governmental machinery, it is opaque. All these SAARC proceedings, I feel, should be made public so that you know what they are doing. And if they are halting or if they are obstructing, then it is in public gaze. So you can go and quiz the guy that why the hell are you stopping this? Like, and this is the mood of transparency the worldwide. SAARC proceedings should be, they have no reason to be,
There's no reason.
To be hidden. They should be open.
And all the governments have a right to information act, I suppose.
Yes.
So there's no reason why it should not be made public.
And once it is public, then you will know that a lot of people are actually engaged in working along the lines which you want. But many a time there is unrest or restiveness among the larger citizenry that nothing is happening. But once they read, they'll realize the quantum of work which is involved.
14
Well, it's 4:30, so maybe one or two very short questions.
Very short question. If US and all other big players are looking at India with only a limited purpose of containing China in their geopolitical or geo-economic decision making, do you think that will be one factor which can really bind these countries to come together as a policy to contain China? A small question.
One more question. Yes, young man. Oh, sorry. I'll come to you.
My question was just related to the fact that are there any mechanisms within SAARC to learn from other regional organizations, like as to not reinvent the wheel, and and because probably the issues might be common within ASEAN as well.
Okay, Mr. Malhotra. This is the last question.
Thank you. Just a quick question, sir. Is it possible for that each one of the SAARC countries could form operation groups consisting of politicians, bureaucrats, and industry to fix what exactly has to be done and get together and do it?
These are your competency area, both of you.
Well, that is certainly possible, but somebody has to take that decision. Well, if the government is willing to take part in that kind of an operational group and is able to give the assurance that decisions which are taken within this group, which will actually be implemented, that would be great. The only reservation I have is that I doubt whether governments will actually agree that they can be a part. Mind you, as I said, there are lots of fora where we do have government, business, academics, and people, civil society groups who actually deliberate on these issues, and they come up with recommendations. But it is still, the challenge remains as to how do we implement this. And with regard to China, as I mentioned, that the countries of the region have different kinds of relations with China, and we cannot dictate what relationship they can have. But I can see that India would have some reservation about a China which is much more sort of prominent in terms of economic relations or political relations or even security relations in the region. But my answer to that is that if India as the largest country in the region creates space, somebody will occupy it. So it's not much point in saying you stay out. In any case, you cannot force people to stay out. You cannot force, say, Bangladesh, if it wishes to have closer relations with China, and because China having that relationship is giving Bangladesh benefit in terms of trade or investment, you cannot say that, no, this cannot happen. But what you can do is, in terms of your own size, because you are the largest country in the region, what benefits are you ready to provide? What services are you ready to give? So that in terms of the interests of the countries of the region, because India is the best partner possible, there is no incentive to really think of other relationships. But to say, I will not extend the service or the benefit, but I will not let you have this from somebody else also, I'm afraid in today's world that is not tenable. So we have to really think this through in a somewhat different fashion. Okay.
So we come to the end. I'd like to end with a line from Faiz Ahmed Faiz. When we do these SAARC things, one is tormented by little things. And there's a line which says, फिर से बुझ जाएंगी शम्में जो हवा तेज चली लाके रखो सरे महफिल कोई खुर्शीद आपके. That means these little candles that you burn, they will blow out once the wind comes. So bring a sun in the center. And given the solar power these days, that's a very topical.
Very good.